The emergency message arrived at the Galactic Defense Academy at 0800 hours, Nexus Standard Time. Admiral Vexter stood in his office, watching the holographic display flicker as the transmission played for the third time. The blue-skinned Catherian ran his four-fingered hand across his ridged forehead, feeling the weight of his position pressing down on him like a collapsed star. "Director, we have a problem," the message began. The speaker was General Morthek, the Catherian High Command's most decorated officer. "Our academy on Nexus Prime has become a disgrace. The cadets are out of control. They show no respect for their instructors. They fight among themselves instead of training together. Worse, they believe they know everything about warfare because they come from warrior species." Vexter paused the message and walked to his window. Below him, the academy grounds stretched out in perfect geometric patterns. Alien cadets from 12 different species moved through their daily routines. At least they appeared to be following orders, but Vexter knew better. The reports from his instructors painted a different picture. These cadets were the worst batch in the Academy's 200-year history. They came from the most proud warrior races in the galaxy. The Zentarons believed their honor code made them superior fighters. The Draconians thought their natural aggression gave them an edge. The Thorian giants trusted only in their physical strength. Each species looked down on the others, and all of them looked down on their instructors. The message continued when Vexter pressed play again. "We need someone who can shake them up. Someone who can make them understand that being born into a warrior culture does not make them warriors. We need an instructor who has actually seen real combat, not just academy simulations." Vexter knew the problem well. Most of the galaxy had been at peace for over 50 years. The last major conflict ended before many of the current instructors were born. The Academy's teachers were good at explaining theory, but they had never fired a weapon in anger. They had never watched friends die or made life-and-death decisions under enemy fire. "I have a suggestion," General Morthek said. "The humans have been members of the Galactic Defense Alliance for only 2 centuries, but their military academies have an interesting reputation. Their graduates perform well in the few conflicts that do arise. Perhaps we should request one of their instructors." Vexter's eyes widened. The humans were still considered a young species by galactic standards. They controlled only a small section of space near the galaxy's edge. Most older species barely paid attention to them. They were polite enough at diplomatic functions, but they rarely spoke up in military councils. "The humans have been involved in several small conflicts since joining the Alliance," the general continued. "Border disputes, pirate raids, that rebellion in the Centauri system. Nothing major, but their soldiers always seem to handle themselves well. Maybe their instructors have something our cadets need to learn." The message ended, leaving Vexter alone with his thoughts. He had met humans before at various conferences and meetings. They seemed pleasant enough, though they had a habit of asking very specific questions about military equipment and tactics. Their representatives always took careful notes and paid close attention to discussions about past conflicts. Vexter activated his communication system and sent a message to the Human Federation's military headquarters on Earth. The request was simple: send one instructor to help train a difficult group of cadets. The message mentioned that cadets came from various warrior species and had been resistant to traditional teaching methods. 3 days later, the response came back. The Human Federation agreed to send an instructor. The message was brief and professional, with no unnecessary details. It simply stated that Captain Lisa Monroe would arrive within 2 weeks aboard a standard transport vessel. Vexter looked up Captain Monroe's file when it arrived. The information was surprisingly thin compared to the detailed records other species usually provided. She was 43 years old, born on the human colony world of Nova Scotia. She had graduated from the Terran Military Academy 22 years ago and had been an instructor for the past 5 years. Her service record showed deployments to various human conflicts, but the descriptions were vague. Centaura Campaign, 14 months deployment. Outer Rim Operations, 18 months deployment. Pirate Suppression, various locations, 36 months total deployment. The records mentioned commendations and medals, but gave no details about what she had actually done to earn them. What puzzled Vexter most was how normal the record seemed. According to the file, Captain Monroe was considered a typical instructor by human standards. She had the required combat experience and teaching credentials, but nothing that marked her as exceptional. For a species requesting their best instructor, the humans had sent someone who appeared to be completely averaged out 2 weeks later. Vexter stood in the Academy's landing bay, waiting for the human transport to arrive. He had informed his senior staff about the incoming instructor, but had decided not to tell the cadets yet. He wanted to see how they would react to her without any preparation. The transport was smaller than expected, a simple cargo vessel with minimal decoration. Most species would have sent their instructor aboard a military ship with full honors. The humans had sent theirs on what looked like a freight hauler. Captain Monroe emerged from the transport carrying a single duffel bag. She wore a plain gray uniform with minimal insignia. No ceremonial weapons, no honor guards, no impressive display of rank. She looked like any other middle-aged human female, with brown hair beginning to show gray at the temples and lines around. Her eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh sunlight. "Admiral Vexter," she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "I'm Captain Monroe. Thank you for the opportunity to work with your cadets." Her voice was calm and steady, with no trace of the arrogance Vexter had expected from a representative of a warrior culture. She seemed almost apologetic about taking up his time. "Captain Monroe," Vexter replied, trying to hide his confusion. "Welcome to Nexus Prime. I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was fine, thank you. I spent most of the trip reviewing the files you sent about the cadets. Interesting group. Lots of potential, but they seem to have some attitude problems." Monroe's casual assessment of the cadets surprised Vexter. The files he had sent contained detailed reports about fighting, insubordination, and complete breakdowns in discipline. She spoke about it like it was a minor training issue. "I should warn you," Vexter said as they walked toward the academy building. "These cadets have been particularly difficult. They have shown disrespect to every instructor we have assigned to them. Some of our best teachers have requested transfers rather than continue working with this group." Monroe nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of disrespect are we talking about?" "They question orders, they refuse to follow training protocols, they start fights with each other. Last week, they locked their combat instructor in a supply closet and told him they would teach the class themselves." "Did they actually teach the class?" The question caught Vexter off guard. Yes, actually. They did conduct a training session. It was completely against regulations, but they did demonstrate various combat techniques from their home worlds." Monroe smiled for the first time since arriving. "That's not entirely bad. Shows initiative at least." "What happened to the instructor they locked up?" "He submitted a transfer request the next day. He said he had never been so humiliated in his career." Monroe shifted her duffel bag to her other shoulder. "Well, we'll see how it goes. I've worked with difficult students before." As they entered the academy building, Vexter wondered what he had gotten himself into. The human seemed pleasant enough, but she showed no signs of being the strong leader these cadets needed. If anything, she seemed too nice, too understanding of their behavior. "When would you like to meet the cadets?" Vexter asked. "Tomorrow morning would be fine. I'd like to observe one of their regular classes first, if that's possible. Get a feel for the group dynamics, of course. I should mention that we usually have security personnel present during their training sessions, just in case." Monroe paused at the entrance to the guest quarters. Security personnel? Are the cadets dangerous? They can be. Unpredictable. And they are all from species with considerable physical capabilities. I see. Monroe seemed to consider this. Information. Well, I suppose we'll find out tomorrow how unpredictable they really are. As Vexter walked back to his office, he could not shake the feeling that he had made a serious mistake. The human instructor seemed completely unprepared for what she was about to face. The cadets would eat her alive, just like they had every other instructor who had tried to teach them. He began composing an apology message to the Human Federation in his head, preparing to explain why their instructor had failed and requesting a replacement. By tomorrow evening, Captain Monroe would probably be requesting the next transport back to Earth. What Vexter did not know was that by human standards, Captain Monroe was considered a gentle instructor, someone who preferred teaching to fighting. Her service record, unremarkable by human military. Captain Monroe arrived at Training Room 7 at exactly 0800 hours. She had spent the night reading detailed files on each cadet, making notes in a small paper notebook she carried everywhere. The alien technology in her guest quarters could have stored the information digitally, but Monroe preferred the old human habit of writing things down by hand. The training room was larger than similar facilities on Earth, designed to accommodate different alien physiologies. High ceilings provided space for the tall Thorian giants, while reinforced floors supported their considerable weight. Specialized equipment lined the walls, adapted for species with different numbers of limbs, sensory organs, and combat styles. Admiral Vexter stood beside her, along with 2 security guards and the Academy's head combat instructor, a reptilian Vicarian named Silthic. The Vicarian looked nervous, his scales shifting color slightly as they waited for the cadets to arrive. "Remember," Vexter whispered, "they will test you immediately. Do not take anything they say personally. They have driven away 4 instructors in the past 6 months. Monroe nodded calmly, still writing in her notebook. "What did the previous instructors do wrong?" Silthic answered, his voice carrying the distinctive hiss of his species. "They tried to establish dominance through traditional methods. Raised voices, punishment details, threats of expulsion. The cadets simply ignored them or found ways to make their lives miserable." "I see." Monroe closed her notebook and slipped it into her pocket. "And what methods work with them?" "Nothing works with them," Vexter said sadly. "That is why we called for help." The training room doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, and the cadets filed in. Monroe studied each one carefully as they entered. Leading the group was Crix Volume, the Zentoran prince. He stood 7 feet tall, with the typical pale blue skin and silver hair of his species. His uniform was perfectly maintained, but he wore it with an arrogance that made every movement look like a challenge. Behind him came Shethkar, the draconian female. Her red scales gleamed under the room's lights, and her amber eyes swept the room like a predator looking for threats. She moved with the deadly grace all draconians were known for, each step perfectly balanced and ready for combat. The Thorian giant Grokmar had to duck to fit through the doorway. His gray skin looked like living stone, and his 4 arms hung at his sides like tree trunks. Despite his size, he moved quietly, a skill that made Thorians excellent ambush fighters. The other 9 cadets represented various species from across the galaxy. Each one had been selected for their potential as military leaders. Each one carried themselves with the confidence that came from belonging to a warrior culture. And each one looked at Monroe with barely concealed contempt. "Is this a joke?" Crix Volume asked, not bothering to address Monroe directly. He spoke to Admiral Vexter instead. "You brought us a human grandmother to teach us about combat?" Several cadets laughed. Monroe noticed that the laughter sounded forced, as if they were following Crixval's lead rather than genuinely finding humor in the situation. "I am Captain Monroe," she said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm and carried easily across the large room without being raised. I will be working with you for the next several weeks. Working with us? Shefkar's voice carried the distinctive growl of her species. What could a soft little human possibly teach us about warfare? Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. Monroe smiled pleasantly. You raise an interesting point. What do you think warfare is about? The question seemed to confuse the cadets. They had expected anger, threats, or demands for respect. Instead, Monroe appeared genuinely curious about their answer. Honor, Crick's volume said immediately. Combat is about proving your worth through honorable victory over your enemies. Strength, Grokmar rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through the floor. The strongest warrior wins. This is the way of nature. Speed and skill, Shefkar added. Strike fast, strike hard, leave no survivors. Monroe nodded thoughtfully at each answer as if she were taking notes for a research paper. Those are all interesting perspectives. Anyone else? A few other cadets offered similar responses. Technology, tactics, superior weapons, better training. Monroe listened to each one with the same polite attention she might give to a student, answering a question about basic mathematics. Thank you, she said when they had finished. Those are all things that can be important in warfare. Let me ask a different question. How many of you have killed someone? The room fell silent. Even. Admiral Vexter seemed shocked by the blunt question. The cadets looked at each other uncertainly, unsure how to respond. I thought so, Monroe said gently. How many of you have seen someone die in combat? More silence. How many of you have been in a real fight where your life was actually in danger? Still. No response. Monroe walked slowly around the group, her hands clasped behind her back like a teacher giving a lecture. Do you know what I was doing when I was your age? I was fighting pirates in the asteroid belt. Real pirates with real weapons who really wanted to kill me. I watched 3 of my squad mates die in a boarding action on a captured freighter. The cadets shifted uncomfortably. This was not going the way they had expected. By the time I was 25, I had been in 17 major engagements and countless minor skirmishes. I had killed 43 people, not including the ones where I could not confirm the kills. I had been wounded 8 times, twice seriously. Enough to require major surgery. Monroe stopped in front of Crick's volume. You want to know about honor? I once had to execute a wounded enemy soldier because leaving him alive would have compromised my unit's position and gotten 12 good people killed. Very honorable. She moved to Shefkar. Speed and skill? I spent 6 months learning to fight left-handed after a plasma burn destroyed the nerves in my right arm. Had to relearn everything because the alternative was dying. Finally she faced Grokmar. Strength? I have seen 70-year-old human soldiers kill opponents twice their size and half their age because they knew how to think instead of just hitting things. The room was completely quiet now. The cadets stared at Monroe with new attention, trying to reconcile her calm, almost grandmotherly appearance with the casual way she talked about killing and death. Here is what I think warfare is really about, Monroe continued. It is about making the other person die for their cause while you live for yours. Everything else is just details. Crick's volume recovered first, his arrogance reasserting itself. Impressive stories, human. But stories are all they are. You stand there talking about your past victories, but what can you do now? You are old, soft, and small. I could break you in half. Monroe's smile never wavered. Would you like to try? The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Admiral Vexter started to step forward, but Monroe held up one hand to stop him. I mean it, she said to Crick's volume. If you think you can break me in half, you are welcome to try, right here, right now. Crick's volume looked around the room, realizing that he had been maneuvered into a corner. If he backed down, he would lose face in front of the other cadets. If he attacked Monroe, he would be proving her point about thinking before acting. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I will not assault an instructor." "Smart choice," Monroe said. "But not for the reasons you think." Without warning, she moved. One moment she was standing 3 feet away from Crick's volume, the next she was behind him with her arm around his throat. The movement was so fast that most of the cadets did not even see it happen. Crick's volume reached up to grab her arm, but Monroe shifted her grip, and suddenly the 7-foot-tall alien was on his knees, gasping for air. She held him there for exactly 3 seconds, then released him and stepped back. "Rule number 1, she said as Crick's volume climbed unsteadily to his feet. "Never assume your opponent is weaker than you just because they look different." She turned to address the entire group. "Rule number 2. In real combat, there are no rules, except winning and losing. Honor, traditions, and fair play are luxuries you can afford only when you are not actually trying to kill someone." Shefkar hissed and dropped into a combat crouch, her claws extending. "My turn, human." Monroe sighed. "Are you sure? I just demonstrated that appearance can be deceiving." The Draconian attacked without further warning, moving with the lightning. Speed her species was famous for. Her claws swept toward Monroe's throat in a killing strike that should have ended the fight instantly. Instead, Monroe was not there when the claws arrived. She had moved sideways and forward inside Shefkar's reach, and her elbow connected with the Draconian's solar plexus. Shefkar folded over, the breath driven from her lungs, and Monroe's knee came up to meet her descending face. The Draconian hit the floor hard and stayed there, semi-conscious and bleeding from her nose. "Rule number 3, Monroe said, not even breathing hard. "Speed without judgment is just a fast way to lose." Grokmar stepped forward, his 4 massive arms spreading wide. "I will not underestimate you, human. But I am still 3 times your size." "Yes, you are," Monroe agreed. "And that gives you certain advantages. But it also gives you certain disadvantages. Would you like me to demonstrate?" The Thorian giant paused, looking down at his 2 defeated classmates. For the first time, uncertainty showed in his small black eyes. "I thought not," Monroe said. "Rule number 4. Know when you are outmatched." The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of healing equipment. Shefkar lay on one of the beds, a regeneration field working to repair her broken nose. She stared at the ceiling, her amber eyes filled with confusion and anger. Crick's volume sat nearby, rubbing his throat where bruises were already forming despite his species' natural healing abilities. "She moved like nothing I have ever seen," Shefkar said, her voice muffled by the medical equipment. "Faster than a Draconian, but not in the way we are fast. Different." "It was not just speed," Crick's volume replied. "She knew exactly where I would be before I knew it myself. Like she could read my thoughts." Dr. Yelinara, the Academy's chief medical officer, finished checking Shefkar's injuries. "You are both lucky," the elderly Altarian said. "Your instructor could have done much worse damage if she wanted to. These are control injuries, designed to disable without permanent harm." Grokmar entered the medical bay, his massive frame filling the doorway. "The others are talking," he rumbled. "They want to know what we should do. What can we do?" Crick's volume asked bitterly. "She defeated 3 of us in less than 5 minutes, and she was not even trying hard." Meanwhile, in Training Room 7, Captain Monroe faced the remaining 9 cadets. They stood in a loose semicircle, keeping their distance but paying attention in a way they never had before. Admiral Vexter watched from the observation deck above, still trying to process what he had witnessed. "I know what you are thinking," Monroe said, walking slowly in front of the group. "You are wondering how a middle-aged human female defeated 3 of your best fighters so easily. You are questioning everything you thought you knew about combat." A cadet named Torvik, Insectoid Jakthari with 4 arms and compound eyes, clicked his mandibles nervously. Instructor Monroe, we were taught that size and natural weapons determine combat effectiveness, but you have neither. That is exactly the problem, Monroe replied. You were taught to fight other members of your own species, using your species' advantages. But real warfare is not about fighting people just like you. It is about fighting anyone and everyone who wants to kill you. She gestured for them to sit on the floor in a circle. It was an informal arrangement that no previous instructor had ever used, and the cadets seemed uncertain about it. Let me tell you about Earth, Monroe began once they were settled. My home world has produced more different types of warfare than any other planet in known space. Do you know why? The cadets shook their heads. Because humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. Not just border skirmishes or honor duels. Total warfare. Wars where entire civilizations tried to destroy each other completely. Monroe pulled up a holographic display from her personal equipment. Images of Earth's history appeared in the air above them. Ancient battlefields, medieval sieges, modern urban combat zones. We have fought in every environment you can imagine. Frozen wastelands, burning deserts, dense jungles, underwater, in space, in the air. We have used every weapon ever invented, from sharp sticks to nuclear missiles. And we have fought against every possible enemy. The first image showed human soldiers in trenches, surrounded by mud and barbed wire. This is from a war where humans dug holes in the ground and shot at each other for 4 years. Millions died fighting over a few miles of worthless land. Do you know what we learned from that? That trench warfare is ineffective, suggested Veltar, a pale Nexian with large black eyes. We learned that when you cannot go around an obstacle, you go through it or under it or over it. We learned that there is always another way, if you are willing to pay the price. The image changed to show soldiers moving through a destroyed city, checking every building and corner. Urban warfare. Fighting building by building, room by room. The enemy could be anywhere. Every window, every doorway, every pile of rubble could hide someone trying to kill you. Monroe changed the image again. Now it showed soldiers jumping from aircraft, their parachutes opening as they fell toward the ground below. Airborne assault. When the enemy thinks they are safe behind their defenses, you drop out of the sky and attack from above. But how? Does this help us? Asked Genvex, a tall, thin Meridian whose people were known for their analytical minds. These are human tactics for fighting other humans. No, Monroe said firmly. These are universal principles that work against any enemy. Let me show you. Monroe stood and walked to the center of the circle. Crick's volume attacked me using Zentaran fighting techniques. Fast, direct, relying on his natural advantages. But I did not fight like a Zentaran. I fought like a human. She demonstrated the movement in slow motion, showing how she had stepped inside his reach and used his momentum against him. Zentarans expect their opponents to either back away or meet them head-on. They do not expect someone to move into the attack instead of away from it. Shethkar used draconian speed and aggression, very effective against most opponents. But humans have fought creatures much faster than draconians. We learned that you do not need to be faster than your enemy, if you can predict where they will be. Monroe showed them the defensive technique she had used, explaining how she had read Shethkar's body language and positioned herself accordingly. And Grokmar is very strong, but strength alone is not enough. Humans have always been physically weaker than most of our enemies. We learn to use tools, tactics, and intelligence to overcome superior strength. The cadets listened with growing fascination as Monroe explained the principles behind each technique. She was not just showing off or trying to intimidate them. She was actually teaching them something new. Every species in this room comes from a proud warrior culture, Monroe continued. But your warrior cultures developed fighting other members of your own species. You learn to excel at one type of combat against one type of enemy. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed a montage of different human conflicts. Humans learned to fight everyone. We did not have the luxury of fighting only opponents who shared our strengths and weaknesses. We had to adapt or die. Is that why human soldiers perform so well in mixed species conflicts? Torvik asked. Because you learn to fight different types of enemies? Partly, Monroe agreed. But there is more to it than that. We also learn something else that most warrior cultures never figure out. She paused, looking around the circle at each cadet. We learned that winning is more important than how you win. The statement seemed to shock some of the cadets. Crick's volume, who had returned from the medical bay during the lesson, looked particularly disturbed. But what about honor? He asked. What about fighting with dignity and courage? Honor and courage are important, Monroe said gently. But they are luxuries you can afford only when you are not actually trying to survive. In real combat, the only honor is in protecting the people who depend on you. The only courage that matters is the courage to do whatever it takes to come home alive. She changed the holographic display to show human soldiers in various situations. Some were fighting conventionally, but others were using tactics that would be considered dishonorable by traditional warrior standards. Humans learned to use camouflage, ambushes, deception, psychological warfare, and anything else that would give us an advantage. We learned to attack supply lines, communications, and civilian infrastructure. We learned that destroying an enemy's ability to fight is often more effective than fighting their soldiers directly. That sounds like cowardice, Shuthkar said, speaking through the medical equipment still attached to her nose. Does it? Monroe asked. Let me tell you about a human battle called Stalingrad. Two massive armies fought for control of a single city for over 5 months. The fighting was so intense that soldiers measured their progress in individual rooms and floors of buildings. Both sides lost hundreds of thousands of people. The hologram showed images of the destroyed city, with soldiers fighting in the ruins. The humans who defended that city used every trick they could think of. They turned children into messengers and spies. They booby-trapped dead bodies. They fought with kitchen knives when they ran out of ammunition. Was that cowardice? The cadets stared at the images in silence. The defenders of Stalingrad were not cowards, Monroe said quietly. They were people fighting for their homes and their families against an enemy that wanted to destroy everything they cared about. They did not have the luxury of worrying about honor or fighting fair. She turned off the holographic display and looked around the circle again. That is what real warfare is about. Not proving how brave or strong or honorable you are. It is about making sure that the people you care about survive while your enemies do not. So what do you want to teach us? Grokmar asked. Monroe smiled. And for the first time, it was not a gentle, grandmotherly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found worthy prey. I want to teach you how to think like humans think. How to fight like humans fight. How to win like humans win. She stood up and brushed off her uniform. Tomorrow we start with basic tactics. How to analyze an enemy's weaknesses and exploit them. How to use terrain, weather, and timing to your advantage. How to coordinate different types of units for maximum effectiveness. And after that? Veltar asked. Monroe's smile grew wider. After that, if you prove you can handle it, I will teach you the advantage. The alarm started screaming at 0347 hours, jolting everyone at the academy from sleep. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors as automated systems announced the threat level. Admiral Vexter rushed to the command center, still fastening his uniform as he ran. Report, he barked at the duty officer, a young Altarian named Kellenex. Long-range sensors have detected a fleet approaching the system, Kellenex said, his 4 fingers dancing across the control interface. 37 ships, mixed classes. They are not responding to identification requests. Vexter studied the tactical display with growing concern. The approaching fleet was too large to be a merchant convoy and too organized to be refugees. Pirates? Most likely, sir. Intelligence reports suggest the Crimson Nebula Gang has been operating in this sector. They have been growing bolder lately. Captain Monroe appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. She moved to the tactical display without waiting for permission, studying the enemy formation with professional interest. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. 18 hours at their current speed, Kallinex replied. "Should we contact the Galactic Defense Force?" Vexter considered the options. The nearest patrol is 3 days away. We have our own defensive systems, but they were designed to discourage raiders, not defeat a full fleet. Monroe walked around the tactical display, examining the enemy formation from different angles. "What kind of defensive systems do you have?" "Standard Academy package," Vexter explained. "Orbital defense platforms, shield generators, some ground-based weapons. Nothing too sophisticated. This is an academy, not a military base. What about your cadets?" Monroe asked quietly. The question surprised everyone in the command center. "What about them?" Vexter replied. "How many are there? What are their capabilities?" 43 cadets total, representing 12 different species. They are all from military families, with basic training in their home cultures. But they are students, not soldiers. Monroe nodded thoughtfully. "I need to see your defensive positions and weapon capabilities. Complete specifications, ammunition counts, power requirements, everything." "Captain Monroe," Vexter said carefully, "I hope you are not suggesting what I think you are suggesting." "I am not suggesting anything yet," Monroe replied. "I am gathering information. May I see the defensive plans?" 2 hours later, Monroe sat in her quarters with data tablets spread across every surface. She had requisitioned detailed maps of the Academy, complete technical specifications for all defensive systems, and personnel files for every cadet and instructor. Her small notebook was filled with calculations and diagrams. A soft knock interrupted her work. "Come in," she called. Crick's volume entered, followed by Shefkar and Grokmar. The 3 former troublemakers looked nervous but determined. "Instructor Monroe," Crick's volume began formally. "We heard about the approaching fleet. We want to help." Monroe looked up from her notes. "Help with what?" "Whatever you are planning," Shefkar said. "We know you are planning something. You spent all morning studying our defenses. And what makes you think I am planning anything beyond a standard evacuation?" Grokmar stepped forward, his massive frame filling most of the room. "Because you are human," he said simply. "And humans do not run from fights they think they can win." Monroe smiled slightly. "You have been paying attention to my lessons." "We have learned much in the past few weeks," Crick's volume said. "You taught us that traditional thinking is limited thinking. You taught us that humans always find another way. So what is the other way here?" Shefkar asked. Monroe set down her data tablet and looked at the 3 cadets. Over the past month, they had transformed from arrogant troublemakers into serious students. They still had their cultural pride, but they had learned to think beyond their traditional limitations. "The other way," Monroe said slowly, "is to turn this academy into something the pirates are not expecting." She gestured for them to sit down, then pulled up a holographic display of the local star system. "Pirates expect to find a soft target here. An academy full of students and teachers who will surrender rather than fight. They expect to loot the place and leave without significant resistance. But we could resist," Grokmar said. "The defensive systems are not powerful, but they exist." "Traditional defensive tactics would fail," Monroe explained. "Orbital platforms against a fleet this size. We would last maybe an hour before they overwhelmed our positions." She changed the display to show a detailed view of the academy and surrounding area. "But what if we did not fight traditionally?" The cadets leaned forward, recognizing the tone Monroe used when she was about to teach them something important. Human military doctrine includes something called defense in depth, Monroe continued. Instead of trying to stop an enemy at one strong point, you create multiple layers of resistance. You make them fight for every meter of ground. She began, highlighting different areas on the map. The Academy has natural defensive advantages that were never designed to be defensive advantages. Underground maintenance tunnels, reinforced buildings, emergency shelters. With proper preparation, we could turn this entire facility into a maze of killing zones. You want to fight the pirates here? On the ground? Shethkar asked. I want to make them think they are fighting a traditional ground battle while we systematically destroy them using unconventional tactics, Monroe corrected. The key is making them commit to a ground assault instead of simply bombarding us from orbit. Crick's volume studied the tactical display with new understanding. You want to make the Academy look too valuable to destroy. Force them to land and fight for it. Exactly. Pirates are motivated by profit. If we can convince them that the Academy contains something valuable enough to justify the risk of a ground assault, they will land troops instead of just blasting us from space. But what could be valuable enough for that? Grokmar asked. Monroe smiled mysteriously. That is where human psychological warfare comes in. We are going to tell them exactly what they want to hear. 6 hours later, Monroe stood in the Academy's communications center, surrounded by cadets and instructors. Admiral Vexter looked skeptical, but he had agreed to let her try her plan. Broadcasting on all frequencies, reported the communications. Officer Monroe activated the transmitter. Attention approaching vessels. This is the Galactic Defense Academy on Nexus Prime. We are a civilian educational facility with no military capabilities. We surrender unconditionally and request safe passage for our students and staff. She paused, then continued with perfect panic in her voice. Please note that we have 37 cadets from royal and noble families currently enrolled, including Prince Crick's volume of Zentora, Princess Yelenara of Altair, and Lord Grokmar of the Thorian clans. We also have significant research materials related to advanced weapons development stored in our underground facilities. The transmission ended, leaving the room in silence. Several instructors looked shocked at Monroe's apparent surrender. You just told them exactly how to hurt us most, one instructor protested. No, Monroe replied calmly. I told them exactly what they want to hear. High-value hostages and valuable research materials. Too much profit to pass up, but too delicate to risk destroying with orbital bombardment. The response came within an hour. The pirate fleet changed course, moving into an assault formation rather than a bombardment pattern. They were taking the bait. Now what? Admiral Vexter asked. Now we prepare the Academy for the kind of battle they will never expect, Monroe said. Torvik, I need you and 5 others to start modifying the maintenance tunnels. Create firing positions and escape routes according to these specifications. She handed out data tablets with detailed instructions. Veltar, you and your team will prepare the false intelligence materials for the research labs. Make them look valuable, but not too valuable. We want the pirates to waste time searching instead of destroying. What about weapons? Shethkar asked. The Academy's armory has training equipment, not military weapons. We improvise, Monroe said simply. Maintenance tools become weapons. Chemical supplies become explosives. Holographic projectors become psychological warfare devices. Remember what I taught you about using what you have instead of wishing for what you do not have. The cadets scattered to their assignments with an energy and purpose they had never shown before. For the first time in their lives, they were preparing for real combat using everything Monroe had taught them. This is insane, Admiral Vexter said quietly when they were alone. You are turning students into soldiers. I am giving them the tools to survive, Monroe corrected. The pirates have already decided to attack. We can either face them as helpless victims or as prepared defenders. And if your plan fails? Monroe looked out the window at the cadets working to fortify their positions. Then at least they will die fighting instead of cowering. But my plan will not fail. How can you be so certain? Monroe turned back to Vexter with that familiar predator's smile. Because the pirates think they are fighting an academy. They have no idea they are about to fight humans. Outside, the cadets worked through the night, transforming their school into a fortress using principles Monroe had taught them. They did not know if they would survive the coming battle, but they knew they would fight it using every dirty trick, unconventional tact. The pirate dropships descended through the atmosphere like falling stars, their engines leaving trails of fire across the dawn sky. Captain Torgash of the Crimson Nebula Gang stood in the lead ship's cockpit, watching the Academy grow larger. Through the viewport, 37 royal hostages and advanced weapons research would make this the most profitable raid of his career. Remember, he told his crew over the communications system, we want the hostages alive and the research materials intact. Kill anyone who resists, but be careful with the valuable ones. Far below, Captain Monroe crouched in the Academy's main building, watching the approaching ships through reinforced windows. Around her, 43 cadets waited in carefully prepared positions. Each one wore improvised armor made from Academy equipment and carried weapons that had been maintenance tools just hours before. How many ships? Crixvolume asked from his position near the main entrance. 12 dropships, Monroe replied quietly into her communication device. Approximately 400 pirates total, if intelligence estimates are correct. 400 against 43, Shethkar muttered from her hiding spot in the ventilation system. Those are not good odds. The odds do not matter, Monroe said calmly. What matters is that they do not know what they are walking into. Admiral Vexter spoke from the command bunker deep underground. Captain Monroe, it is not too late to reconsider. We could still attempt a genuine surrender. No. Monroe replied firmly. They came here to take hostages and steal research. Even if we surrendered, they would still kill people and destroy the Academy. This way, at least we have a chance. The first dropship touched down in the Academy's main courtyard, followed quickly by the others. Pirates poured out in loose formations. Their weapons ready, but their attention focused on finding the entrance to the underground facilities Monroe had mentioned in her fake surrender message. Wait for my signal, Monroe whispered to the cadets. Remember everything we practiced. Patience, precision, and overwhelming force applied at the right moment. Captain Torgash led a group of 20 pirates toward the main building. They expected to find cowering students and teachers, ready to hand over their valuable hostages without a fight. Instead, they found empty corridors and silence. Spread out, Torgash ordered. Check every room. The hostages have to be here somewhere. That was when Monroe gave the signal. The first pirate squad walked into what appeared to be an empty classroom. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing Torvik and 3 other cadets with improvised projectile weapons. The pirates had no time to react before they were cut down by a coordinated crossfire. Contact! One of the surviving pirates shouted into his communicator, "We are under attack in Section 7. But the attack had only begun. As more pirates rushed toward the sounds of gunfire, they triggered the next phase of Monroe's plan. Grokmar and his team, hidden in the maintenance tunnels below, used shaped charges made from chemistry lab supplies to collapse sections of flooring. Pirates fell into the tunnels, where they faced close-quarters combat against opponents who knew every inch of the underground maze. What is happening? Torgash demanded, trying to coordinate his scattered forces. These are supposed to be students. In the Academy's communications center, Monroe monitored the battle through security cameras and cadet reports. The pirates were reacting exactly as she had predicted, sending more troops into the building to reinforce their advance teams instead of pulling back to reassess the situation. Phase 2, she announced to her cadets. Begin psychological operations. Throughout the building, hidden speakers began broadcasting the sounds of battle from other locations. Pirates heard gunfire and explosions coming from rooms they knew were empty, creating confusion about how many defenders they were actually fighting. Holographic projectors, normally used for educational displays, now showed false images of armed soldiers in corridors where no one actually stood. HFY moved through the ventilation system like a ghost, appearing suddenly to attack isolated pirates before vanishing again. Her natural draconian stealth abilities, combined with Monroe's teachings about unconventional warfare, made her nearly impossible to track. "Sir," one of Torgash's lieutenants reported, "we have lost contact with Squads 3, 7, and 12. Squad 5 reports heavy resistance in the basement levels." "Heavy resistance from what?" Torgash snapped. "They are students. Sir, these do not fight like students. They are using military tactics, coordinated attacks, and sophisticated equipment." Torgash considered this information. Pirates survived by avoiding fights they could not win, and this situation was rapidly becoming more dangerous than profitable. "All units fall back to the courtyard," he ordered. "We will bombard the building from orbit and search the ruins for the research materials." But Monroe had anticipated this possibility too. As the pirates began their retreat, the final phase of her plan activated. Hidden throughout the courtyard were devices that had once been environmental control systems for the Academy's various alien habitats. Modified by the cadets, they now released clouds of different gases and chemicals. The Thorian pirates found themselves breathing atmosphere that made them dizzy and confused. The Draconian raiders discovered that their heat vision was disrupted by thermal interference. Each species faced conditions specifically designed to neutralize their natural advantages. "Now," Monroe said into her communicator, "all units, full assault." The cadets erupted from their hiding places throughout the Academy complex. But they were no longer the same students who had arrived at the Academy months earlier. Monroe's training had transformed them into something new, something that combined the best of their individual species' warrior traditions with human, tactical thinking. Crick's volume led a charge across the courtyard, but instead of the honorable single combat his people favored, he used cover and suppressing fire to pin down enemy positions, while other cadets flanked them. HFY attacked with draconian speed, but she targeted communications equipment and leadership rather than seeking glorious individual victories. The pirates found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they made it. When they tried to form defensive positions, the cadets attacked from unexpected directions. When they attempted to retreat, they discovered that their escape routes had been blocked or booby-trapped. "This is impossible," Torgash shouted as his carefully planned raid collapsed into chaos around him. "They are just Academy students." "No," said a calm voice behind him. "They are students who learned from a human." Torgash spun around to find Captain Monroe standing behind him, somehow having appeared in the middle of his command group without anyone noticing. She held an improvised weapon that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, but the way she held it suggested deadly competence. "Surrender," Monroe said simply. "Your forces are defeated, your ships are surrounded, and you have no way to escape." "You are bluffing," Torgash snarled, raising his own weapon. One human against an entire pirate fleet. "Look around," Monroe suggested. Torgash did look around, and what he saw filled him with horror. His 400 pirates were being systematically destroyed by 43 students using tactics he did not understand and weapons he could not identify. The battle was not even close. "How?" he whispered. "You made the same mistake everyone Makes when they fight humans, Monroe explained as pirate resistance collapsed throughout the courtyard. You assumed we fight fair. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. The surviving pirates, fewer than 50 of the original 400, found themselves surrounded and disarmed. Their ships were captured by cadets who had used maintenance tunnels to approach them from below. In the aftermath, Admiral Vexter emerged from the command bunker to survey the scene. The Academy's courtyard looked like a battlefield, but it was a battlefield where his students had won a complete victory against overwhelming odds. How many casualties? He asked Monroe. 7 cadets wounded, none seriously, Monroe replied. The pirates lost 347 killed or wounded. Vexter stared at the numbers in disbelief. That is impossible. They outnumbered you 10 to 1. Numbers do not matter if you know how to use them, Monroe said. We had better tactics, better preparation, and better motivation. But they are just students, Vexter protested. Monroe looked at the cadets as they secured prisoners and treated wounded comrades. Crick's volume was coordinating prisoner processing with the efficiency of a veteran officer. Shethkar was analyzing captured equipment for intelligence value. Grokmar was directing repairs to damaged Academy systems. No, Monroe said quietly. They were students when this started. Now they are something else. 2 weeks later, Monroe stood in the Academy's landing bay, preparing to return to Earth. Her assignment was complete, and the Human Federation had sent a transport to collect her. The cadets gathered to see her off, but they were not the same group she had met months earlier. What will you tell your superiors about us? Crick's volume asked. Monroe smiled. I will tell them that you learned well, that you proved worthy of the lessons I taught you. And what will you tell them about yourself? Shethkar asked. Nothing special, Monroe replied. I did what any human instructor would have done in the same situation. As